Hi everyone, welcome back to No Sugar with Everything Krause. So today's episode, we want to talk about our faith again and kind of bring that back into the podcast rotation. We were saying yesterday how we just feel like this is a topic that we will continuously come back to, and it's one that we want to like sprinkle in every once in a while because it is obviously growing continuously and it's such a big part of our life. So how can we bring that to the podcast and share our thoughts on it and how it's helping us or whatever with our listeners? So today we want to specifically talk about really just being able to lean on your faith and trusting in God and his plan for you and like fully putting that trust in him and the plan. I feel like it's sometimes easy to be like, oh yeah, I trust in the plan, but then you're getting overwhelmed or you're anxious or you're stressed, you're overthinking, and then you're not really putting your full faith in the Lord and his plan for you. So kind of talking about that, we talk a lot about it with each other. So kind of, yeah, just bringing that conversation back here and sharing our insights on it.
And it's kind of funny because Kateri and I recognized also that our episodes on faith have really been about faith in general, like our relationship with God. And I think this topic, specifically leaning on our faith, has been very prevalent in our life within these past 2 weeks. You know, we've had a little more test, a little more faith needed. Like I've had to lean a lot on God recently. And I was talking to Kateri and I was like, why do we only ever share our relationship with God? Like, why don't we ever talk about like different aspects of the relationship with God? And one of that aspects is really leaning on him and not on your own understanding, but trusting in God and his path for you. And that's really hard to do. It's a lot easier said than done. So as I said, really within these past 2 weeks, our faith has been tested a lot more. And I think it was about 2 weeks ago, I was praying to God and I was asking him a ton of questions. There was a lot on my mind. I was very, very anxious and I just wanted to know answers. And I kept saying to God, like, I don't understand this. I don't understand that. And normally when I pray to God, I feel like I walk away with answers. I walk away with realizations. I walk away with clarity on whatever I had to think about. And that's like normally, that's how I approached God, was like, he is my therapist where he gets me to the end realization that I need. And I'm okay with that thought. And this particular week, I wasn't really finding the answer I wanted. Like God wasn't giving me the answer. And I was like, I'm not understanding. I'm not understanding what this means. I'm not understanding this sign. And it was that moment where I was like saying the words, I'm not understanding. And this Bible verse just shot up in my mind. And it's the one that I'll read it to you guys. It's my block screen. Trust in the Lord with all of your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to him and he will make your path straight. And I was just saying, I was like, oh my God, I literally was just saying to you, God, I'm not understanding. I'm not understanding. Like that exact quote is saying, like, lean not on your understanding. That's what faith is really trusting in God when you don't understand. And as simple as that seems, it was such like a realization in that moment of like, wow, I'm trying to figure it out right now. I'm trying to find every answer. Sometimes we're not meant to know the answer. Sometimes we're not meant to understand. And that's why you need faith. You know, there would be no reason to have faith. There would be no reason to lean on God if you always had the answer or you always knew the path.
Exactly.
And that was just a really strong feeling of like, of understanding and being okay with not understanding. Like I understood that I wasn't going to understand. And for once that put me at peace and allowed me to kind of put my faith in God. And I think when you recognize that some things aren't meant to be understood and you kind of play that in your head and work through that thought, it's easier to have faith in God. It's easier for you to be like, okay, like that's the only place I can turn then, which sometimes needs to be the ultimatum for people.
Yeah, exactly. And I feel like when you're saying you're not supposed to understand, it's almost like you're not supposed to be understanding in that moment. And you might not understand why something is happening the way it's happening, you know, or the situation that you're in until a year later or 5 years later when like something comes full circle and you're like, now I get why that happened to me at that moment. Now I understand a little bit more about that path because it led me to where I am now. So it's almost just being accepting of I'm not going to have all the answers right now because I'm not supposed to. And maybe God blinds us from fully understanding and keeps it from us, because if we truly understood, like you said, one, we wouldn't need faith, but also like maybe we would overthink and then question everything and then make another decision that would remove what was meant for us in our life. Almost like, I don't know if that makes sense, but maybe we're just not supposed to know for our own like safety and our mental state, and really keeping things in our life that God has placed for us specifically.
It makes me think of like when people say God heard a conversation that you didn't, like you never heard. You know, when people talk about breakups and stuff, and they're like, oh, God must have heard that conversation and you didn't. And I always think about it, and I'm like, I wouldn't have wanted to hear that conversation. So I'm so grateful that God removed me from it, because whatever the conversation was that he heard probably would have very much upset me and ruined my mental state. So
Yeah.
I always just think of that. But that was that is so true, Gutierrez. I think once you see those instances in your life as well, like looking back on my life, I can see so many areas where I was questioning, and I maybe wasn't leaning on my faith, but didn't recognize that I had to lean on my faith. And I just remember being anxious, like even the decision of going to Drexel, where I was going to college, that was such an anxious situation for me, so stressful the entire college process. And being here now, it's so amazing to see like, wow, that was God's plan for me. I didn't understand then, but man, do I understand now. And I am literally so eternally grateful. And just witnessing that and looking back and recognizing moments where I had to trust God and not my own understanding makes it a lot easier for me to trust him more, because I'm like, wow, look at where he brought me now. Like I trusted him and he took care of me. That means he'll always take care of me. He really is working for me. And that personally has helped me kind of lean on him more recently, because I really do inherently trust wherever God is taking me. It's not like, oh God, like, okay, I'm putting my faith in you. It's like a deep, like, no, God, I'm giving you my worries. I'm giving you my anxieties. Remove them from me. And I'm not going to think about this again, because you are the only one who knows. And that's what I'm okay with. And that became so deep and so real when I reflected on the instances in my life that he did show up for me.
And I feel like a good thing to point out is, with people might be saying like, okay, well, how do you just start like trusting in God, and like how do you give him your worries and your anxieties and put it in his hands and out of yours? And it's almost like a habit. It's like building a habit, right? You need to continuously do it for it to be like mind muscle memory, and your body just to naturally do it, and your thoughts to naturally go there. And I feel like you are very much at that point where, like, if you have a worry, you've just been the person to say to me almost like, give it to God. Like, you have to give it to him. You can't try and understand this right now. And I'm almost I feel like right now I'm in the process of making it a habit of, okay, I'm going to put this in your hands, God. I'm going to trust you, and I'm not going to try and understand this because it's not for me to understand, but I'm just going to have faith that whatever the outcome of this is for my higher good and is meant for me in some way, shape, or form. But so starting off, it is like a habit. You kind of just have to get used to just saying to God, like, I'm going to give you this because I don't want it on my chest, and I know that I can trust you. And just start by saying that like over and over again almost. And then the more you do it, the more it really does come naturally for you. And then that's when I think, like, even without you realizing it, you might just start putting your faith in the Lord more without having to say anything. It's just like naturally in your mind, like, well, I have faith that this is going to work out the way it should. And then it just is a natural part of your life. It's like having positive thoughts about your life. If you're starting to like force yourself to have positive thoughts, naturally that will become a habit, and you'll just see the world in a more positive light. It's the same thing with faith.
And like all habits, it's very hard to form. And I understand that. Like it's very hard to just be able to keep doing that and keep doing it when like you may not even really believe it. That's the hardest part about this
or like
habit.
Something really frustrating happens and you're like, I'm mad. Like, I don't want to understand why you did that, because like that's bullshit.
It's those moments where it's really going to be hard to turn to God or hard to lean on that faith. And I recognize that a lot of those instances, like Terry said, it may be a certain situation where you really are clouded by your emotions. Your first thought is not God because you're overwhelmed with sadness, with anxiety, with whatever is going through your mind at the time. I completely understand that. I definitely am at the point where Gatiri said where I am inherently trusting in God, and I'm really proud to be there because I remember starting fall term. I'll never forget my one goal for fall term was I want to learn how to prioritize God in my day. Like, why is he not my first thought in those moments of anxiety? Because that's what I was dealing with. I would have the reflection that I can lean on God after I had a really anxious week. And I was like, if I leaned on him starting Monday, my week maybe would have gone a lot better. I'm just saying that for reference because it is achievable to get to the point where it is inherent belief and leaning on God. And that's why I really emphasize the importance of building the relationship with God. That's why I bring that up, because I never understood how to make God a priority until I put in the work with my relationship with God, and it came naturally because naturally I was growing with him, and naturally my mind was just on him more, that he was my first thought in those moments of anxiety, because I pray every single day, because I talk to him, because he's on my mind in everything that I do. I was able to turn to him in that moment of anxiety. Like, that was my first thought. Whereas if I go a week without praying and then something makes me anxious or something really stressful happens or sad, whatever it may be, I'm not going to turn to him as quickly because, well, I haven't been in communication with him all week. But when I'm talking to him every day, it's very easy to turn to that immediately.
No, literally. It's like working out a muscle almost. Would you ever take a week off of working out? No, because you're like, it's for my health. One, it keeps me like sane during the day. I feel good. There's like all these reasons that once you're used to working out, you're going to keep working out. It's the same thing with praying and talking to God and making him a priority. If you're not consistent with it, like, oh, I pray one day and then I don't pray for a couple days. It's like if you work out one day and then you don't for another 5 days, you're not going to see results because you're not being consistent. It's the same thing with prayer. If you don't put in the work to actually have a relationship, you won't naturally feel him in your life or in your thoughts like you're exactly describing. He won't be top of mind as easily for you. And then maybe when something bad's happened, that's when you're like, oh, shit, now I'm remembering my relationship because I need him instead of needing him or talking to him when things are just going like regular. There's nothing like crazy good happening, but there's nothing bad happening. It's just life is normal. And being able to have a relationship with throughout all the stages of life is really what will set the foundation to be able to be in this really, really good place with him and in your life. And like you said in the beginning, like the past 2 weeks, I feel like we have been like tested almost. And when you were having a prayer and you came to the realization of like, wow, I'm trying to lean on my understanding too much. Once you recognize that, you had peace and you found peace within yourself. And I feel like, obviously, because I know what was happening, I could just see like the weight being lifted off your shoulder and how much lighter you were about it, everything that was happening, like it just, you carried yourself differently. And that's what happens is God creates the peace in your life if you let him. You have to let it in though.
It's really, I was going to bring that up, Kateri, because that really was how it felt. I let God bring me peace and he really delivered because, and that's what true faith is. Like in that moment, I chose to really trust in God, like purely, fully, and was like, I have no choice but to trust in you. That's kind of the point I think I was at mentally. And because I did that, Kateri's exactly right. It wasn't even like a psychological thing where I was like, okay, like I trust God now. It was literally, I think I felt God throughout the entire week of like, I was simply at peace. All of those anxious thoughts I had were leveled out. They weren't on my mind. Like everything that I was overthinking about wasn't even crossing my mind anymore. And I was just like, wow, like I'm so at peace with trusting in God. And like, I feel so okay that I have him to lean on that I'm not even worried about it anymore. I don't even know I really don't know how to describe it. It wasn't even like God brought me the peace. It was like the thought of knowing I had someone to purely lean on and the thought of knowing that it really was in his control brought me so much peace. And I also just want to say like one thing that I do during prayer when I am telling God, like, I'm really going to trust in him. A physical action that I do that may help you guys if you do struggle with it is I literally close my eyes when I'm praying and I'm like, God, I'm giving you, this is what I say. I say, I'm giving you all of my anxieties, all of my doubts, my fears, my worries, all of these burdens on my shoulder, all of this weight on my back. And I literally like jolt my shoulders. I'm like, I am giving it to you. And I like act like I'm like removing it from my back, and I'm giving it to you, and I'm going to trust and lean on you. And like, I say those words for words. And I feel like when I say that and do that action, it like mentally convinces me that I've now given it to God. And like, that's the only choice I have. Which I don't know if it's not really faith, but like that's like a little tip for you if that's maybe what works for you. I don't know.
Yeah, no, that's a good idea too, because if you think so, Tony Robbins, he's an example of this. He does this like warm up almost to like get him pumped up before he goes to like give up speech or, you know, has to hype up the crowd. And one time I was doing like a training with him, like it was this free virtual one. And he was like, you have to have like one thing that you do that when you do it, because your body knows why you're doing it, like it becomes like as soon as you do it, it's going to do what it's meant to do essentially. So like you doing the shoulder thing is
It like triggers peace.
Yeah, like it's training your mind and to actually know like when I do that, I'm giving it to God. Like that is what you've trained that move to do for you. I don't know, I did not explain that well, but it's like,
no, I know
creating
exactly what
that
you mean.
connection between like a physical action that you can do to connect with your words, so then your mind knows that like, okay, I'm doing that and I'm speaking that, that's what this means.
Well, it's like how your body operates. That's why when your eyes physically see the sun setting, your body starts to shut down and get ready for bed. It's like that's our bodies respond to certain actions. So that's a great point, Kateri. I also want to bring up, because I've just had so many thoughts on this, a Bible story that I've read recently, which in general, I think that, just side note, reading the Bible, like how I said, work on your relationship. If prayer isn't maybe your favorite, read the Bible. I have obviously just started because of the new year, and I never really understood. Like I always thought read the Bible because, okay, I should know God's word. And now I'm understanding that read the Bible because when you read his word, trusting in him becomes easier. Turning to him becomes easier because you're reading and understanding why you can turn to him. You know what I mean? Like everyone's like, oh, like lean on God. He's there for you. Why is he there for you? Have you ever read the origin of why he's there for you? Like when you read the Bible and you hear him tell you to actually turn to him, you're like, oh, wait, he told us to do that. So my priest didn't just make that up and tell me to trust in him. It's like I read that in the Bible. So I also love reading the Bible for that, because I just feel like it's given me reason behind all of these words and everything that I've learned within my faith. I'm now understanding like where it came from. And
it gives like context to our faith.
It gives context to your faith. And sometimes people need that. Like if you need to understand why you can lean on God, read the Bible. There's a million examples of why you can lean on him, which is one that I want to bring up because it taught me a lot. And I've discussed it with you, Kateri, and I discussed it with Dad yesterday. And it's just such a powerful story to me. Like these stories, you read them. That's the thing about the Bible, is you read them, and if you look at them surface level, they're just stories. But when you really analyze them, the message runs so deep, so deep. And this is probably one of my favorite messages. And it's literally like one of the first stories of the Bible. It's the story of Abraham and his son Isaac. I've talked to you about this, Kateri. For those of you who don't know, Abraham was really chosen by God. God spoke to him and God trusted him, and he had many covenants with him, which a covenant would be like Abraham would do something for God, and in return, God would keep a promise to Abraham. So Abraham, go down to this city and preach my word to these people. Abraham would go do it. Abraham, go give all of your gold and silver to these people. You don't need it. Okay, Abraham would go do it. And every time Abraham would just trust in God's word. It was very easy for him to trust. Oh God, you want me to go preach? You want me to go give? Sure, I'll go do that. And he really was just a great follower of Christ. And God always rewarded him for that. So God was like, okay, Abraham, I will give you a firstborn son named Isaac. Abraham gets this son that he's been waiting for his entire life. And one day God calls on Abraham and says, Abraham, I want you to bring your son up to this mountain, and I want you to sacrifice him. And you hear that, and like when I was reading that, I was like, oof, what?
Yeah. You're just like,
wow, God, like that was a lot of you to ask. And reading Abraham's response, he was so quick to be like, okay, sure. Let me
Yeah.
go do that. He packed his bags. He's brought his son. He brought all the tools to kill his son on this altar. And it got to the point on the mountain where he laid his son down on the table and was literally about to take whatever it was, the blade to his throat, and kill his son. And God stopped him and said, remove your son from the altar. Sacrifice this goat instead. I will save your son. Like, you have not proved to me, it wasn't really a story of proving, but like, I've seen your faith in me and my plan, that I'm not going to make you do this. I'm not going to make you do something really hard. And when I read that story, I was just like, wow. What I noticed was, okay, look at how often Abraham trusted God throughout life. Those are really easy moments to have faith. Like, there's different levels of faith. Sometimes it's really easy to have faith in God. Life may not be hard. You may fail a test and you're like, you know what, God, I'm going to put my faith in you and know that this term's going to work out. Everything with this class is going to work out. I'm going to pass. That's a really easy instance of having faith. But where is your faith when he really, really tests you with something hard? When he asks you to kill your son, are you going to be there still having faith, trusting in God's plan? Because that's what Abraham did. No matter how harsh the action was, Abraham trusted that God was going to reward him, that God was doing this for a reason, and God knew the path for Abraham. So whether Abraham wanted to or not, he knew that God wanted it. And I don't know, it just seemed so powerful to me, because I was like, wow, it just painted it in the light of, I'm so quick to trust God. Where's my trust in him when it really does shit hits the fan? And I feel like a lot of the emotions this past 2 weeks were a little bit harsher of a test. You know,
Shit was hitting the fan.
Shit was hitting the fan. And in those moments, I really had to trust in God. And I was like, that's the true test of faith. Like, where are you when it's at the hardest? Where are you when it's really hard to trust in him? And when you do trust in him, like, God will give you that reward. That's what you need faith for. If it was easy to trust in him, you wouldn't need faith.
Exactly.
I don't know if I'm articulating this correctly.
No, 100%. And one, I love that story, and we kind of read it at the same time. So like I've said, I started the Bible in a year listening on Spotify. And after that story, Father Mike Schmidt, he explained it. Is it Schmidt?
Father Mike Schmidt.
Okay.
Right.
I didn't know if it was Schmitz.
No, Father Mike Schmidt.
Schmidt, okay. I really questioned myself as soon as I said it, because I was thinking of Schmidt. Anyway, so at the end of that reading, he was explaining basically what this meant for Abraham, right? And he was like, kind of the same reaction when we first read it and when I first heard it, of like, oof, that's harsh. Like, why are you doing that, God? That seems like a little far, almost, just to like test his faith almost. But the point was really showing that, as Father Mike said, Abraham, no matter what he was going to do, and he was going to sacrifice his son because he was trusting in God's command to do it, he had faith that God was going to give his son back to him, and he was going to kill him. So he literally said, like, he thought he would kill his son and then God would give him his son back, would raise him from the dead, because he just trusted that God's not going to make me do something that's going to harm me in the end, that's going to hurt me and take and inflict so much pain on me. Like, there's going to be a good outcome for this. And that's what God had shown Abraham in all the easier trials that he had to do. He had shown him, like, do this, there's your reward, basically, and that I will take care of you no matter what I tell you to do. And that's what he did with his son. And it wasn't until he gave his, which he was, but in the moment of right before he's about to kill his son and sacrifice him, of full faith, because he's going through it, that God was like, you've shown me that you fully trust me and you have full faith in me, and here's your out. This is your reward now. Like, you don't have to do what I've asked you to do, basically. But it's just crazy, like, hearing then the explanation of, like, the whole point of the story really is learning about what true faith is, and having that strong faith and trust in God and in his plan for us and what he's asking us to do. Because sometimes there might be, a thought that comes in your head about, oh, like, maybe I actually have to go do that. And you're like, but that's not, like, really what I thought for myself. Like, I didn't think I was going to be a teacher, or I didn't think I'd be an entrepreneur, but I feel like that's my calling. Well, God gave you that in your mind for a reason.
Yeah.
So it's almost your duty to have faith in that plan for you and that it's going to work out the way it should. Another thing that I just want to bring up because Isabel, you had said it earlier and I wanted to point on it, but then our conversations just flow. It's like you can't always interrupt. But faith really does take work and you have to put in the work. And like you choosing to go on your walk and literally like sacrifice your time to listen to music or listen to a podcast, call someone, call a friend. You're sacrificing that time to pray to God. Like you're putting in the actual work to have a relationship with Him. And that's not easy. Like there's so many times when I go on a walk and I have to admit, like, you're really, really good. And Isabel is like the best role model, I have to say, for me, because every time she's like, oh, I walk and I prayed, I'm like, she goes on like an hour walk. I'm walking on like a 40-minute walk around our neighborhood and I am like putting off praying. Like I'll just like sit there in silence and like, oh, but I just want to listen to like the toast or I want to listen to something light and airy and not be thinking so much. But that's what you have to do. Like you can't expect to have a relationship or something in return from God if you're not putting in the work to get there. And that's the same thing with anything in life. Like if you ask yourself, how are you supposed to get a promotion if you're not putting in the work at work?
Yeah.
You know, it's the same thing. How you expect to receive God's peace and understanding and wisdom and guidance when you're not putting in the work to know Him.
Yeah.
And just share your life. And it's honestly like relatively easy. You're just talking about yourself almost.
Yeah, you're talking.
You're asking questions, talking about yourself, like asking for guidance through. It's literally like you said, like it's a therapy session.
Well, and I completely understand Kateri because don't get me wrong, like there are moments like when I start, like you said, it's an hour walk. I'm 20 minutes in and I still haven't started the prayer yet. Like I'm resisting it and I feel it. And there are some moments because just like you, I don't really want to work through some thoughts sometimes. I don't want to have heavy thoughts. I just want to like give my mind a rest. And just for your advice, like to get over that resistance, because that is why I resisted. I'm like, oh, I don't feel like debriefing everything right now with God. I approach God now as like the one time I started praying to Him and I was like, God, there's a lot on my mind. And honestly, I don't want to talk about it all. Like, I don't want to talk about it. I just want to talk to you about the light and airy stuff going on in my day. I want to talk to you about how happy my morning coffee made me. And you taught me this, Kateri. God is there as a friend, a supporter, a truth teller. Like He is everything to us. Just because He gives us hard truths, just because He makes us think through our thoughts and has us question some things, it doesn't mean that He isn't also just a friend sometimes and someone that you can just put your head on and cry and not have to actually think. And when I realized that, and I realized that God could also be my friend and not someone that I need to fear or learn from, I was like, oh wow, I'm very at peace with just talking to Him about my day and not really working through those intense thoughts. Just like a side note, because that always makes my prayer, like going into thinking that way always makes my prayer a lot easier when I don't set it up as like, wow, I'm about to have a really intense discussion.
Yeah.
And sometimes it may lead to the intense discussion and then I'm very happy because I'm like, wow, I naturally got there.
It naturally got there. But that's just another reason why it's so good to consistently work on your relationship with Him, because think about it. If you met someone random in a coffee shop, you're not going to go open up to them and cry on their shoulder if you don't know them. But you're more likely to do that with a friend who you have a connection with and you've gotten to know and they know about your life and you've shared stories with each other. Like you're more open to do that than with a stranger. So don't let God be a stranger.
Yeah, exactly.
Another reason I feel like I will sometimes, and maybe this can be kind of relatable for people, of why I'll maybe resist praying is sometimes I worry I don't have the words to say. And I don't know, or I just like question, I'm like, okay, yeah, I might be worrying about something, but after that, I'm just like, okay, what next almost? And what else is there for me to ask God? Like maybe I don't have the good questions or I'm not wise enough to have these amazing thought-provoking questions. And that's no reason not to pray. And that's very normal. I think once you just start doing it, it falls into place almost and you'll naturally come up with like questions and and more things to talk about. Like you said, it might spiral into a whole hour-long conversation. You're like, wow, it's crazy how we got here when I was dreading it in the beginning.
Yeah.
But you never know where it's going to lead. But sometimes that's just like a random note. I feel like I'm resisting because I'm like, I don't have the wisest things to say. And I'm not like the most thought-provoking human being sometimes. And that's okay. But that's not, you don't need to be this like philosophical human being to pray.
Yeah, it can be so, it can start off so simple. It really can. It doesn't even ever really need to get deep. Sometimes there's conversations with God where I'm like, I'm sorry, God, like my mind is literally everywhere right now. I'm just going to thank you for everything that I do have and like end this prayer. Like if you know, you know. But it's funny that you say that because sometimes I'll like legitimately, that's why I do tell God about my day. I run him through my day sometimes because it'll spark things that maybe have been on my mind that I didn't recognize. So like the one morning I was like talking about my week. I was like reflecting on the week and I was like, oh, like I've been moving my body in the morning and blah, blah, blah. And like, I'm so grateful to be able to move my body. I went on a walk today. I went to the gym this morning and then I'll like spiral from the gym and I'll be like, wow, how amazing is it that I could lift this much this morning? And then I'll be like, oh, it's so sad that I'm so mean to myself. It's so sad that I look in the mirror and like criticize my body. And then I'll go in a rabbit hole of like, God, I'm so sorry for that. Wow, I'm beautiful. And it literally just like sparks a train of thoughts. And that's just me talking about my morning. I didn't even get to my lunch yet with him. And then I'm like, oh my God, that was the entire prayer. So it's like when you talk about just your day, sometimes it may spark something that has been on your mind that you don't realize. And you may just want to unpack it. And then you feel so good after because you're like, wow, I never knew I needed to talk about that.
Yeah. Well, that's a great idea. I do kind of like that.
Just because I'm like, oh, like we'll talk about this recording and then I may be like, oh, I'm having some thoughts about EK, like I'm not doing enough work for it. Like it just triggers random thoughts.
Yeah, then that'll lead into something.
Going off the resistance of prayer, it's so funny when I resist prayer because it takes a really good prayer to show me how stupid it is of me that I resisted that prayer.
Literally.
And it's often sometimes the day that I am resisting it, I have that really good prayer to show me. And I feel like that's God talking to me for a reason, like as well. Why are you even resisting? Like, look what can come from this. Every time I do pray to God, it is the best result. Like always. There is literally never one bad thing that comes from it. I leave the conversation and I'm like, well, regardless of whether it was like a massive realization, like I just feel better that I just spoke to God for an hour or for 20 minutes or for 5 minutes. I just feel better. And it's so funny because every time I do resist it, I'm like, that's what I tell myself. I'm like, you're going to feel great after this. Like you are feeling called to pray right now for a reason. Don't resist it. You're going to feel great. You just got to start. Like all things in life, you just got to start. We're always naturally going to be resistant towards something. That's why you need to be disciplined. But that's kind of the same with faith too. And that's why I bring that up, because once you start trusting in God and seeing the reward, like you're just going to be like, oh my God, like why would I not trust in him? And that's what happened. Like when I said these past 2 weeks, I really did lean on him and not on my own understanding. And for I would say like the first like really big time, like other than the Drexel story I said, I really noticed how having faith in him affected me after. And it was one of the best feelings ever. Like when I tell you the peace I had throughout these past 2 weeks, when quite frankly, there wasn't much room for peace, but I just had this overwhelming feeling of it inside. Like I just wasn't freaking out inside. And it literally was God. I felt him give me the peace. And when I think of that, I'm like, why would I never trust in you? Like even in the hardest moments, now I know that this is how it can feel. Like even when it's that hard, I can still feel this much at peace. And I know you don't only want to think of the reward to do something, but I think that makes it a lot easier to go trust in him again. You know, if you trusted him and you're not seeing any result, which sometimes may be the case, like God may not give you the understanding right away. He may not give you the peace right away. And you may have to continue to have faith with hardship.
Like I said, it could take 5 years.
Yeah, it could take 5 years. But once you see that final plan, once you see why he gave you that test, it's like, wow, I'm so silly for never leaning on you my entire life. It's like all I want to do now when I think back of this past week is like, man, like every time it is hard, I'm just going to turn to you, God. Like that's why I feel like I am so ingrained in that turn to God, because he helped me so much last week. He's going to help me next time and the next time and the next. I don't know if that even makes sense, but
no, it does. And it honestly is like a reflection of the Abraham story. He had so much, history with God's reward and having faith in him and trusting in him, that when it got to the really hard times, he had previous reminders to remind him that like it was going to be okay. And it was in the end. And that's kind of like, we're humans, that's what we need, is like we need to remember the reward, we need to remember the good that God gives us like when we do stuff, and to drive us to like keep that faith going and the trust going.
Yeah, it's a beautiful thing.
Yeah. So yeah, just to kind of wrap up the episode, like I said in the beginning, our faith is so big, you know, like faith is not this like, oh, I pray or I go to church. There's so many different parts to faith, and I feel like this was a part of it that we wanted to talk about, and it's been affecting our life. And like as Will said, we've been seeing what it truly means and what can happen when you have full faith and trust in God and you give him your anxieties and everything. And that's just one section of it. That's one sector of faith, and there's so many other things that go into having faith and a relationship with God. So kind of starting off here of just sharing more about how you can deepen your relationship and what it can do for you, and just sharing that with our listeners, because I think it's so important. And if you're going through something, or you're not going through anything and you're kind of coasting through life right now, feeling good, like everything seems to be really aligned for you, you can still give that to God. Like you can still talk to him about that, and you can still tell him like, I'm going to give you any bumps in the road that come my way. I'm going to give you any of the people who might be wishing for the worst for me, like any haters, anything like that. Like you can still give that to God. You don't have to be going through like the worst day of your life to give him anxieties and troubles and worries. You don't have to be feeling them all the time just to give them to him.
God wants it all always, because even this is one thing, just side note, that Kateri and I have been like, even the tiniest of struggles, there's still a struggle for you for a reason. So you can still give that to God. It doesn't need to be the craziest thing to ever happen to you.
Exactly.
So that's a good point, Kateri. But yeah, just a reminder to lean not on your own understanding and lean fully on God. That's what full faith is. And when you surrender to God and give him your full faith, you will be rewarded, and your path will be made straight. So
love that.
That's my favorite line.
So sis, go ahead.
Like, follow. What do I say?
I love how you're like, I'm not doing this jingle jangle anymore.
No, but I'm not doing the interact with us, please.
Oh, right. There it is.
Like, follow, comment, share, interact with us, please. Anything to spread the word of no sugar. Subscribe. We really do love you guys so much. Like, it actually makes Kateri and I so happy. And happy Valentine's Day. Valentine's.
Yes, Valentine's.
If you're listening to this on the Tuesday or the Wednesday, Valentine's Day is coming up. You guys are our Valentine. So please
literally
give us a Valentine's Day gift and share the love of no sugar.
Yeah, literally, like, share this and then go on YouTube and hit subscribe. Perfect. That's just that. That's the bouquet of flowers for us.
Yeah. That's our bouquet. Like, comment, subscribe, follow.
Yeah. That's a beautiful bouquet. Pookie, you are looking absolutely fire tonight.
Oh, God.
Okay.
All right, Pooks.
Okay, Pookinistas. All right, Suganistas. We hope you have an amazing rest of your day, an amazing week, and we will see you next time.